Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the MLSecOps Podcast. I'm delighted to be here with you today. My name is Cari McCarthy. I'm the MLSecOps Community Manager, and I am thrilled to be hosting yet again a very special guest who some of our longtime audience may recognize, Dr. Cari Miller, who joined us in our very first season of the podcast back in April 2023. Dr. Miller, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us again on the show.
I am so glad to be back. Thank you.
Yes, it's a delight. So before we dive into a couple of the things that we want to talk about today, you've been very busy, up to a lot in the realms of, AI governance and procurement, and to some degree, ethics. Can you maybe highlight some of the projects you've been working on over the last year and a half, maybe some initiatives, and give the audience a little insider peek into what you've been up to?
Yeah, it's funny, this space, there is no shortage of work. There's always stuff to be done. So I tend to focus on a couple of primary domains. My biggest domain is workplace technology that spans the entire employment life cycle, from hiring all the way to separation. I don't only focus on hiring. That kind of makes me a little nuts when we do that. So I like to look across the whole life cycle. That includes productivity monitoring, coaching, benefits, delivery, all sorts of things. And so one of the projects that I'm completing is an AI audit criteria catalog with ForHumanity. We've been working on that literally for 18 months. I think there are 61 use cases that we're covering in that criteria catalog. So I do focus on that as a domain, but I also focus on functions. And so the two functions I focus on are AI audit, obviously, but procurement is the other function that I focus on. Every time I look at this stuff, I keep coming back to, well, why would you let the bad stuff in? Maybe you should just do a little procurement practice there and not let the bad stuff in. So I tend to refer to procurement and audits as why these should be cornerstones in every AI governance strategy. So procurement's been a huge focus, and so much so that I started a nonprofit organization with one of my research partners, Giselle Waters. And we called it the AI Procurement Lab because we're not as creative, I guess, as we could be. And so that's been keeping us pretty busy.
Amazing. And yeah, let's double click a bit on the work at AI Procurement Lab, maybe a bit about the mission of that organization and some of the tools and frameworks that y'all have been working on developing, you and Giselle.
Yeah, sure. So Giselle actually is the chair of an IEEE standard that's been in development for 3 years. I joined her about 2.5 years ago. And the standard is procuring AI. And so when you work with IEEE, you get this collection of people from all across the globe that come in to build a standard based on consensus. So it's pretty rigorously debated. So we're just about to publish that standard. I bring this up because as we have been working on the standard, IEEE, we've been getting calls from across the globe, governments, Australia, UK, Europe, Brazil, everywhere, saying, is it done yet? Can we see it? We're like, there's something here. People need information. They were craving the process. What do you do? How do you do it? What do I need to teach my people? And so that was what prompted us to stand up the AI Procurement Lab. And so the mission basically is to help organizations build capacity to be able to buy AI and make sure that what you're buying is good and healthy and kind of you are able to mitigate the risks that are inside of it. We know none of it's perfect, but you should be able to mitigate risks or at least, spot them and deal with them. And so that's what we've been doing there. One of our cornerstone tools that we work with is a risk management framework for procuring AI that we co-wrote together.
Awesome. One of the things that I was hoping to chat more with you about today, Dr. Miller, was the AI Procurement Risk Management Framework, which can be found on the AI Procurement Lab's website. Something that we chat a lot about within the MLSecOps community and on this show is not only securing the AI lifecycle from end to end, but a lot of other considerations for machine learning security operations like GRC, governance, risk compliance, and also trusted AI. And that's kind of a term that we coined to envelop other terms like responsible AI, ethical AI that are sometimes used interchangeably. And there are a lot of those responsibility and ethics pieces when it comes to responsible AI acquisition or procurement. The procurement risk management framework that y'all developed, I've looked at it several times, and it's an elegant governance control mechanism, I think, that a lot of the audience could benefit from hearing more about. Could you maybe walk us through, I think there are 5 steps in the framework, just at a high level, maybe using an example of like a real life business need to help boost some of our understanding about how other organizations might use it?
Yeah, I purposefully designed it to follow what we're all familiar with in, I think, technology risk management, and that is like the COSO, ISO, very traditional risk management framework. So we have NIST, AIRMF, and they serve their purposes, but this risk management framework, I just wanted to be as much to traditional as I possibly could. And so what I did was I took some core components. So as I talk through, I think everyone will recognize these. I did sneak in one prerequisite. And so I'll talk about that one first because I think it's important. The prerequisite is that you have a legitimate business need and that you've defined your problem that you're trying to solve. Because I think we're finding more often than not, unfortunately, that organizations are being approached by vendors and they're given the opportunity to pilot something, or let me just do a free trial with you, and then there's adoption without a rigorous procurement process. And so they don't even know if they have a need for this tech. It just sounds good and we'll try it, and then all of a sudden here it is. So my preference would be you have a legitimate business need. Okay, so that's the prerequisite. And then inside of the framework, yes, 5 steps: risk appetite, a risk-aware solicitation, risk assessment, risk controls, and risk monitoring. And so when we do the risk appetite, this one was really important to me. There is a calculator inside of this thing that helps people sort of think about it. It's a thought exercise, and it helps you think about the risks that each and every procurement bring to you, because they're all different. So we can't just say, oh, in medical, that's always going to be high risk. No, it's not. It's really not. Now, if you're going to x-ray my lungs and find out if I have cancer, I'm going to tell you that's high risk. For, I think, all the reasons we could all say that that's going to be high risk. That's, life and limb, right? Now, if you're going to run a pilot study with AI to try to pulse disposable goods, gauze and, earwax removers and things to the hospital, and that's just a small pilot and you just want just-in-time inventory, it's also in the medical domain, but I would not call that high risk. It's a secondary use. It's not direct to the patient. So this is why we do the risk appetite, to understand where we are on the risk scale so that we know how rigorous we need to be with our controls. And so that brings us to the risk-aware solicitation requirements, which is really important as you go to market asking for solutions from the vendors, because what we're finding is there are no cookie cutter solutions. We're not commoditized in most of this stuff right now. Everybody's coming up with new ideas to address the same kind of unique need. So we get the risk-aware solicitation requirements, which means ask smart questions, make sure they understand your privacy needs, and your security requirements, and who your stakeholders are, and why explainability is important to those stakeholders. Put that in the solicitation so they know what you're working with. And then you go into the assessment, which is evaluating the responses. It's as obvious as it sounds. And then the other gotcha that we're seeing in our research is the risk control area. And another way to say that is use your contract wisely. And so we like to put into the contract some obvious clauses like what is the purpose and the use of your AI, and don't change that without notifying us, or preferably just don't change it. And other things like, by the way, don't do a significant change without us first approving and reviewing. So use your contract wisely to either arrest the risk, share the risk, somehow control the risk. You can do that with the contract. And then monitoring, which you all know very well what that side of the coin looks like. I don't need to go there with you.
Right. So you bring up a really good point, Dr. Miller, about keeping a close eye on your contract. And you mentioned something quickly about shared responsibility. And just from my own personal curiosity, I was wondering if you have opinions or recommendations, or how you view the world in terms of shared responsibility, risk liability between the vendor and the user.
Thank you. That's a great question. So it kind of brought my mind to an area we like to all refer to as incident management. I think at this point everyone's familiar with incident management. The challenge I see with incident management is that it is borrowed, the term is borrowed from IT. Traditional, we've been using this term for 2 decades, right? And it kind of means, oh, my password didn't work, oh, there's a system outage. So we have this old school notion of what an incident is. When we use it in AI, we might say, oh, there was an incident, and we kind of look back to the tech team and say, well, you all will fix that, right? Because it's an incident. However, in AI, I would like to introduce another phrase, appeals. So when something is off the rails with a system, yes, it may be an incident. Maybe someone or a class of people are being rejected for a loan. But the appeals process also needs to be handled. So all the people that were then rejected because of the incident that occurred, all those people their appeal needs to be processed and dealt with. So that is a shared risk responsibility. The vendor has something to do, and the person that was impacted has something to do, and the buyer has something to do in that equation. So it's a little trifecta of shared risk right there.
Makes sense. For some of our audience who these concepts may be newer to them, a lot of them are going to be familiar with them because we've been talking about it for a while. But when we're talking about assessing some of this risk, one of the things we like to point out is that buyers face certain types of risks with AI-powered tech, which could be, financial consequences as a result of an incident, or, in the future, as more regulation comes around, potentially legal consequences, or one that's been big to date is the reputational consequences of, I would say it's a hiring platform and their algorithm is found to have some sort of bias in it that is, keeping certain folks from being considered for positions, or even their application being reviewed by a recruiter, or the example that you've mentioned, home loans, AI being used to assess people who are applying for loans. In those examples of where there might be bias, I could be thinking about this wrong, but in my mind, it seems like a lot of the responsibility in those examples might be more on the vendor because it is their application. And so, they're responsible for training these models essentially, and the algorithms that are behind some of these machine decisions. And then the buyer has still some responsibility to be auditing perhaps, and making sure that the systems are, giving output that is not going to cause any harm. But where does that all come together? I mean, it seems so convoluted, and I know I'm kind of just waxing on about this here, but any insights there, or it's a lot.
No, it is, and it's complicated, and this is one of the roadblocks that we're running into, and why the AI Procurement Lab it's one of the barriers that we need to address because it is complicated and it feels very overwhelming. And so here's what we tell people to how to start to address this. The first thing would be to understand the system, understand the underlying parts of the system. When you go through the procurement, when you're doing your assessment, you understand and you're asking all the questions you need to ask. Where was the training data? Was it representative? Was it robust? All of the questions, you gather as much information as possible. To the extent you're finding risks, which you will, everybody's new at this, and no machine is perfect, nor is a human, right? And so you're going to set up KPIs in your contract. That's what we recommend. I recommend them as a separate schedule. So don't bury them into clause 43, section F, D9, III. Like, put them out as a separate schedule, so you can refer to them so that your team monitoring this can manage them and get them reported on routinely, monthly, quarterly, whatever makes the most sense for the use case, and keep an eye on them. And here's the trick: when they are triggered, when you've breached them, when you approach them, when you're within 5%, start a trigger response action plan so that I better do something here. I better go back and check that data. I might have to shut the system down for a minute and take a real hard look at what's going on here. So those are the things we can do in the short term until these systems get better and better. But that's the best we can do right now. At least that's our advice.
Right. That makes perfect sense. And we're all kind of in it together, learning together and improving upon practices and policy and advisement. Okay. So this has been a beautiful way for us to set the stage for what I was really interested in diving into with you today, all of your knowledge and expertise within this procurement space. There was a memo that was released last month, September, which one I'm talking about already, from the Executive Office of the President in the U.S. Office of Management and Budget. And gosh, I have my note here. The official title of the memo was Advancing the Responsible Acquisition of Artificial Intelligence in Government. So I'd love just to get your overall take on it. Does it align with what you see as best practices for acquiring AI systems responsibly, just, across the board and also within government? Any initial thoughts on where it's taking us?
Yes, it does. So that you're referring to OMB Memo M-24-18. It was a really fascinating memo because it's a continuation of, we started back with the blueprint, and then there was Executive Order 14-110, I believe, which started to set up structure, have an AI officer and put some structure in place, which is, when you think of governance, you have to have people, processes or policies, and then processes. So the executive order started to set up the people part. M-24-10, which also came from OMB, started to set up some policies about not this kind of AI, but yes, we're going to watch this kind. And hey, by the way, get your reporting house in order. And now we're finally at the process part. So that's what M-24-18 is, like rubber on the road. Like, this is how I want you to do this stuff. And so, it really lined up with a lot of what we're doing, what's in the RMF that we published. Several other organizations have published on this topic, and it lines up with them. There is a chorus of us in this space, in the AI procurement space. We have the same hymnal, and we are singing in tune together. And we have been talking in our various parts and pieces to OMB, and they have been listening. And what came out, we were all like, they got it. Good job. So is it perfect? Is it whole? No, but they got it. And they got it in a measured way, which was probably more appropriate than we were being very aggressive as advocates. They gave the government a little leeway to say, well, if it's this kind of a use case in my kind of a domain, in my situation, I might relax this or that, or I might be more stringent about this or that. So I thought it was pretty good.
Okay. Well, that's reassuring to hear that so many of these groups are all, obvious. One would assume that y'all know each other and are, cross collaborating and talking with everyone. So it's good to hear. One of the big themes in the memo, Dr. Miller, is about cross-functional collaboration in AI procurement, and there are some calls to action within the doc, and I'll share a link to the doc in the show notes, or the memo in the show notes, so that our audience can read it. But one of the recommendations was formalize cross-functional collaboration to manage AI performance and risks. And I'm just going to finish kind of reading out part of the quote here for the audience. Each agency must establish or update policies and procedures for internal agency collaboration to ensure that acquisition of an AI system or service will have the appropriate controls in place to comply with the requirements of this memo, and that the agency's use of the acquired AI will conform to the memo. And then this is the big piece. Within 180 days of issuance of the memo, agency chief AI officers must submit written notification to OMB identifying the process, that's a piece that you mentioned, made toward implementing this requirement and identifying any challenges. What do you think are the best ways that these agencies are going to be able to approach breaking down the silos in their teams, like procurement, IT, security, even like budgeting, legal, civil rights, in order to ensure the smoother AI adoption and that they're kind of meeting the requirements of this memo together? I mean, where do you even start when you're trying to get everybody on board for something like that?
This, I applaud them for doing this. And by the way, this is not unique to government. This is what all organizations, you should know what AI you have. And your groups, it's a team sport. If you think one, right, if you think one functional area is going to handle all this, okay, good luck. No, it is absolutely a team sport. So I applaud what they did here. They also call for knowledge sharing, like very deliberate knowledge sharing, collaboration stuff. So I look at this as a very traditional change management situation. I'm a certified change manager, and I'm like, okay, what do we do here? Well, first thing you do is explain to everybody, huddle up. Why are we doing this? Well, okay, because there's things that could harm people, and that's not what we want to do with our taxpayer dollars. If you're a regular organization, you kind of just don't want to harm people. It's not good for your reputation. It's not good for your bottom line. It's not good for your employees. So you explain the change, why it's important. You make sure that you have some specific goals, which in this memo they outlined the specific goals, so that's helpful, and milestones and things like that. And then you name names. You know, where's the belly button I'm going to push to make sure this happens. And you put together a plan that's reasonable. I think the most important things when we go through exercises like this is to follow the feedback. You know, when we do change management, we sometimes forget that part, that like it's okay to be nimble and agile, and like something might not work, like maybe where we're putting our knowledge bank isn't like accessible to everybody, or, you know, so and so felt left out. Oh, okay, bring them in. Like, it's okay. We can be flexible. Yeah.
I'm going to put you on the spot with this next question, because it's a little bit outside of the prep that we did for the show. But
Okay.
have you seen examples in real life, maybe with clients or orgs that you've talked with, who have begun to embark on that knowledge sharing process or change management process, and like what things they're doing specifically that have, in your mind, been successful as part of that knowledge sharing? Like, is it outside of that initial huddle? Is it, you know, months long training? Is it sending them to third party workshops, or any recommendations there for how that knowledge sharing could be facilitated most effectively? Yeah. I mean, it's such a new thing that
it is, but not new to some government organizations. So I'm drawn to the Department of Homeland Security and the IRS. And so the Department of Homeland Security started this journey probably 2 years ago. I mean, I'm sure they would be like, no, for way longer than that. But in my opinion, about a couple of years ago, they really huddled up set up some teams, did some exploratory work. They really started experimenting. They're pretty disciplined about how they go about their research and what systems are going to work and what not, and how they want to procure those things. And they have their house in order. And it's your example of like, are they doing workshops or whatever? I feel like what they're doing is everything, everywhere, all at once. Like, it's just a little bit of everything for
Just
everybody.
attacking it from any angle that you can.
Yeah, really are. Yeah. And they have great people. Like, they've hired really well in, butts and seats in the right spots and the right kinds of people. The IRS has done something similar too. But they've narrowed their scope on like what they really want to deep dive into. So they're sitting on piles of data. And so I call them getting ready to get ready. So most of what they're doing is data stuff, like cleaning up data and making sure the data is going to be good enough so that when they get to be able to use AI that can tell them, here's trends, here's patterns, here's whatever, that they've got their data house in order. So they're doing the same thing, but you don't need the entire organization yet because you're just focused on organizational hygiene for this one area so far.
Got it.
Those are the two. Yeah.
Okay. That's a good seg actually into my next question. The OMB memo also places emphasis on privacy, security, and data ownership. Can you suggest any strategies or describe anything you've seen for managing those types of risks during the AI procurement or acquisition process? I mean, you might have touched on this a little bit when you were talking about contract, but those things specifically, like data ownership and security and privacy.
Yeah, so part of it is, again, it's all use case specific. And so it depends on if you're using someone else's data or if they're going to use your data. So understanding how good your data is looking. But at the very beginning, if it's going to be rights impacting or safety impacting, which is what the memo, the OMB memo, mainly focused on, they don't call it high risk like they do in the EU. They called it rights impacting and safety impacting. So if we're in that territory, then you really should do an impact assessment first. And that's before you start writing your solicitation. It's just a good exercise to understand, like, this is the territory I'm about to walk into, or in other cases, the spider web I'm going to walk into with my mouth open. That's not something you want to do. So let's just do the first exercise. And then that helps you write a good, thoughtful solicitation, right? So you can ask the vendors questions and lay out some terms and conditions. And then, yes, put it into the contract. And then, you conduct routine audits, which people are like, oh God, I don't want to do that. But you have to if it's risky,
Right. It's important.
Yeah.
Okay. One last memo related question before we kind of wrap up here. You've given the audience a couple really great examples about some high risk areas, like related to hiring programs and also healthcare. There was another really interesting call out in the memo related to acquiring generative AI or Gen AI and also AI enabled biometric systems, which could be super high risk areas. Could you help the audience understand, Dr. Miller, why those technologies, specifically like AI based biometric systems, could be higher risk, and what some suggestions are for considerations that agencies should be thinking about when acquiring those types of technologies? Like biometric systems, if I were to try to explain that to a relative, there are some of them that just don't know what that is. So maybe we could start at that level and then kind of help us understand like where the risk is there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for the record, you hit on the two use cases, Gen AI and biometric, that as I was reading the memo, I'm like, that wasn't in the playbook. Where'd that come from? So those of us that have the hymnal that are singing, in choir, that wasn't in the playbook. But I'm so glad that they called that out. Okay, so biometric, gosh, these systems are popping up everywhere, right? We use it to open up and unlock our phone. We use it when we clock in at McDonald's with our fingerprint, or we're driving Uber and we need to clock in for Uber. They will use FacePrint sometimes. So these systems are taking any kind of feature that's unique to you, no one else, and
the bio prefix.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And then they're using that for, typically it's some kind of a security measure because it's unique to you, right? So yeah, they put that in the memo. And they put some parameters around it as to say, be extra, 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 extra careful if you're going to go down this path. Now, the EU was kind of like, whoa, 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 I'm not even sure about this. But the US was like, okay, but you got to be really careful. And mainly because it is really suspect for discrimination issues. So think about ADA issues. One exact feature that biometric can pick up is, think about if you're on a platform for a train station, you might have a camera that watches the platform to make sure there's no shenanigans going on, right? Well, as it's watching the people on the platform, you could have someone come through with a severe limp, maybe they have cerebral palsy, and the camera could flag that person, and then it just flags that the police officer needs to go check on someone. That seems kind of unequal and unfair. So there's discrimination involved in these kinds of systems. And then the other thing is data. What are you doing with it? How are you keeping it? Are you going to keep my face forever? What if I grow a beard? What if I'm growing old as a lady? I could grow a mustache. You don't know. Like, that might not be my face for very much longer. So there's all kinds of data issues that we need to be concerned with biometrics. Can I talk about Gen AI for a second? Because that one surprised me the most, I think.
Please.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so this one, their main gripe, I guess, I'll say it that way because I can, in the memo was vendor lock-in. This happens all the time in government, no matter what kind of contract it is, that vendors, you always, as a government contractor, you're always trying to angle for like, oh, switching costs and you're going to stay with me forever. And so they took that and looked at generative AI and they said, you know what, actually, we don't want you to just adopt ChatGPT for whatever it is you're doing there. We want you to compete that. And we want you to go out and look at the generative AI systems that are available. And we want you to really understand what your use case is. And we want you to really understand, is ChatGPT the right one for me? Or should I use Llama? Because Llama gives me more privacy. Or Llama's training data was better for my use case. And so they're kind of pushing this requirement for competition. And in the process, you get transparency, more visibility to pricing terms and control over pricing, possibly. They're requiring better visibility to licensing agreements, understanding of security requirements, definitely data controls, and control over future change management and things. So I thought that was great because it says, stop just blindly adopting stuff and treat generative AI as you would treat anything else you're going to do in the government.
Oh, interesting. I'm glad that you called that out. I had overlooked that piece when I was reading through.
Yeah,
so that's
a good one.
Yeah. As we look toward 2025, what do you see as our biggest hurdles to jump? Or I might reframe that and say, what are our biggest opportunities in AI procurement and governance? And what should organizations, government and otherwise, be prepping for, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's a single answer for both challenge and opportunity, and that is literacy, AI literacy. So there's levels of literacy, right? I think we have all established some terms that fairness and equality and responsible AI and, Siri is AI and Google Maps is AI. Like we get it. Now we need to move to level 2 of Donkey Kong here, which is our domains. So if you work in procurement, if you work in marketing, if you work in HR, you need to understand the AI and the issues, concerns, risks, and opportunities specific to your domain. And so I hear companies talk about upskilling all the time, and I never hear this this level of detail. Like, we don't have training programs for this yet. So that was part of why the AI Procurement Lab opted out, is because what we can do is train procurement professionals. There's things that you need to know. You're not changing your job. You're adding to it. So I got to get you over that learning curve so you can keep sailing. So that is an opportunity and a threat. If we don't do it, it's a threat. If you do it, it's a great opportunity.
Yeah. And I love the idea of these procurement professionals being trained on this. And I mean, it makes sense, them as an entry point for these applications that could be coming on. Like, if the procurement professionals understand what some of the risks are, even what they need to be looking for, then they're armed with the knowledge to loop in relevant stakeholders within the organization and make sure that these things are being done responsibly.
That is the trick. We're not
they can bring everyone together.
We're just teaching them to know how to go fish over there and go fish in that pond because you need koi today, or salmon, or absolutely. It's team sport.
Yep. No, I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else that you'd like to can you share anything else with us, Dr. Miller, about kind of what's next on the roadmap for AI Procurement Lab, or how the audience can stay up to date with what you're working on and where you are, where you might be speaking? What's that for you?
Well, I would say follow me on LinkedIn. It's Cari, Cari-Miller. And follow the AI Procurement Lab. My next, let's see, what do I have next? Well, so we have the IEEE standard is going to publish at the very early part, we're hoping, of next year. So that's going to be pretty significant. I'm also we're getting close on publishing it's about a 200-page document on audit criteria for automated employment decision tools. That's going to be big. And something that's under my skin that I'm probably going to do a giant rant on is regulation stifling innovation, because I have had it up to here with people talking about that. Regulation is a good thing. It spawns innovation more than it stifles innovation. So someone's going to get for me on that front.
That's been a debate for a while now. I mean, a couple of years, especially since the ChatGPT explosion and all of this. Yeah, I'll be very interested to read that. I will keep an eye out for it. I hope that you do it. All right. Well, once again, thank you so much for your time. It was a super treat for me to get to chat with you again 18 months after the first time. And I would also like to give a shout out and thanks to the sponsors of the show, Protect AI, all of you listeners at the MLSecOps community. You can go find the very first episode that Dr. Miller joined us for at community.mlsecops.com. I'll link to that in the show notes, as well as many other resources there. And until what I hope will be next time, Dr. Miller, thank you again so much.
Thanks for having me.